So we're very thrilled to be part of this festival of medical curiosity today. And thank you, Ronan, so much for bringing us here. And thank you also to the brilliant speakers that we've heard so far this morning and the ones to come. Today, we're going to be talking about whether works of literature, particularly fiction, have a place in a clinical setting. You will hopefully notice that all of you by now should have one of these on your seat or somewhere nearby, which is a prescription card of a very different kind to the prescriptions that you might be used to dealing with yourselves if you're doctors. We would like you, during the course of our talk, over the next half an hour or so, to write down your life-changing book. So we would like this to be a transforming book, a book that you might have read in your childhood, in your teens, or 20s, or last decade, or even last week. But a book that you feel in some way changed your life, in some way was transformative. Ideally, it would be fiction, but it can be non-fiction. If no book comes to mind easily, then you could just write down your favourite book, because we're going to collect up these cards later and redistribute them so everyone will have a chance to get a prescription of a different sort.
And ideally not the Index Medicus, whatever it was we were hearing about earlier, although I imagine that did change your lives quite a lot. For me, it was this book, the Paean to the Beat generation from the early 50s, late 40s, which I'm sure many people here have read. Famously written in the space of 3 weeks on one continuous scroll of typewriter paper, fueled by coffee and Benzedrine. This was a book that came to me when I was 19 years old and living away from home for the first time. I guess up till that point in my life, everything had been quite safe. Grew up in the same place with the same family, could kind of know the shape of next year would be pretty much like the shape of the previous year with a few different names. So this book really completely blew my mind. It was basically introducing me to the idea of not planning and not knowing, as we were hearing about earlier. It's about these two young guys, Dean Moriarty, Sal Paradise, who answer this siren call to head west across America. They jump on the back of a flatbed truck with a small canvas bag with hardly anything in it and basically decide to say yes to everything that comes along, to life's infinite possibilities, and just get caught up in the whole mad swirl of whatever happens, which I then subsequently started to do in ways which were sometimes quite terrifying and sometimes quite dangerous. I did, a few years later, actually find myself heading across the States. I ended up setting my first novel in the southwestern states, dating lots of inappropriate American men and saying yes to them all, and then finally actually marrying one of them, who is here tonight and who's probably subsequently been, this afternoon, been looking for the book, which is going to make me say no occasionally to whatever comes along. So that was mine.
Mine was Tarzan of the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs. I was one of 4 children, and I had 3 older brothers, so I was brought up on a rather exclusive diet of boys' literature, including Tintin and Asterix and Obelix. And then I found Tarzan. You might think that's similar, boys' literature, which it was. But it had a very profound effect on me because it made me into the avid reader that I became, because it's the first of 22 novels in the series. And I was entranced by the amazing sights and sounds and smells of the jungle, which were brought so vividly to life by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And during that period, I would often be found running around the house trying to grab imaginary creepers and wearing the closest thing I could find to a loincloth, which would be my brother's underpants.
It does still happen occasionally as well.
We actually moved to Trinidad during that period, and I then saw the jungle outside my window, which was very similar seeming to the jungle in these books. And I started to draw the jungle that I could see outside the windows, which I'd already imagined in my head through reading. And I used to draw it on any handy walls of my parents' house, much to their delight. And I therefore feel that Edgar Rice Burroughs was responsible for my twin passions, which have remained my raison d'etre for the rest of my life, which are reading and painting. Whatever your life transforming book is, which you could all be thinking about at this moment and maybe jotting it down, I think you'll all agree that a brilliant book has the power to put you into someone else's shoes. And it's transformative because when you read it, you inhabit the psyche of the characters within that book. You become that person. You leave your own life behind. You forget your troubles and frets and whatever's going on outside, and you are stepping into the shoes of that character. So a brilliant novel gives you an opportunity to travel in time, to go back into other centuries or to go forwards, to be someone of a different gender and to be someone of a different race. It's generally the point of view character that you will inhabit, but you're also inhabiting, to some extent, the psyche of the author. Having this experience of reading a transforming book is something that develops you, expands you, and most crucially of all, gives you the power of empathy, which is something that we've been talking about earlier today.
So, in the time that we've been working with bibliotherapy, it's sort of coincided with a general interest amongst the neuroscience community with starting to look at what is happening in the reading brain when we read and what's going on. And there does seem to be a connection emerging between the ability to empathize and reading, which is perhaps not surprising given this thing that happens when we read, this magic thing that happens where we kind of forget where we're sitting when we're reading, we forget the noises of the train around us in the noisy carriage, and we just inhabit this other world of the book. But what is perhaps surprising and is very interesting to us is that this effect does seem to be stronger than others, the effect of becoming more empathetic. So, for instance, these two books were part of a study done about 5 years ago in which literary fiction, such as Alice Munro, Chekhov, these are short story writers, as you know, was found to create higher levels of empathy in the people reading those books than books like these. And indeed, non-fiction, which they tested as well. So that begs the question of why, obviously, and the scientists conducting this experiment decided that it was something to do with the old creative writing adage of show, don't tell. So in a literary novel, emotions tend to be shown more. This is generalizing, but this is something that we all study as writers and readers are aware of. So somebody coming into the room, blazing into the room, waving their arms around, flushed red face, sparks in their eyes, you might infer that this character is a little upset. In a different sort of novel, somebody might come into the room and the author may say, he was really angry that day. So, in that sort of fiction, we don't get to practice this skill which actually we need for everyday life all the time. We are trying to infer from somebody's behavior what might be going on for them. So there's a correlation there. So the connection between empathy levels and reading is probably no surprise to anybody who reads a lot. And indeed, it's hard to imagine that some people in the public eye right now, I'm not going to name any names, might, for instance, not feel quite the same about people of a different racial ethnicity to their own, if, for instance, they have been brought up in the company of books such as these. These are probably the first one you'll know. People of a certain age will know this Cry of the Beloved Country set in South Africa during the time of apartheid, and Noughts and Crosses is a fantastic, more contemporary book in which black and white are reversed. It's a really cool book. Or indeed, the person which we're all probably thinking of may not manhandle women in the way that he does if he'd been brought up in the company of these very strong heroines to be found in this book. And indeed would probably have nothing but respect and possibly even terror of women if he had ever met the heroine of this very extraordinary novel, which is written by a Norwegian writer, Sigrid Undset, who's actually a Nobel Prize winner of literature. And it features a Viking woman who is raped early on in the course of the story. And rather than go away and curl up and escape from the world, she decides to go after her attacker. And there are these great scenes of her with skis on her feet, going through these snowy Norwegian forests with wolves howling in the distance and a baby strapped to her back. And it's the most fantastically thrilling novel, which we use a lot for as a sort of role model of a courageous woman.
So we'll all agree, I'm pretty sure everyone here would agree, that words and stories are powerful things. In the words of Professor Dumbledore, words are, in my not so humble opinion, our most inexhaustible source of magic, capable of both inflicting injury and remedying it. The question is therefore not whether books are transformative, but whether bibliotherapy, the art of giving a person the right book to read at the right time, in other words, prescribing books in the hope of achieving a specific outcome, actually works. It's the idea of taking books out of the realms of a chance encounter when you just stumble across a book in a bookshop or on someone else's shelf, and taking it into the realm of conscious intent. And this is what Susan and I have been doing at the School of Life in Bloomsbury since 2008. The School of Life is an alternative academic establishment which was started by Alain de Botton in Bloomsbury. And there we've been getting our bibliotherapy clients to prostrate themselves upon a couch and tell us their innermost woes, their loves and loathings in literature, and also what's going on in their lives since that time. And at the end of a session, when we have a bibliotherapy session, we give our clients the 6 perfect books we hope for them to read at this time, addressing any issues that they might have, whether they're literary issues or personal issues or indeed physical and mental issues. So they do have to bare their souls, these clients, but they also talk about purely the joy and love of literature to some degree too.
And the couch has to be leopard skin, right?
In an ideal world. We actually perform quite a lot of our bibliotherapy sessions on Skype too, so it can be done long distance. So although when Suze and I were at Cambridge together first talking about bibliotherapy, we thought that we'd invented the whole idea. We did discover when we began to really look into it more deeply that it's been around since the time of the ancient Greeks. And Aristotle used to talk about the healing power of art. In those days, theatres were built right next door to hospitals because the Greeks understood the power and importance of catharsis. They realized that witnessing deep emotion and giving vent to the emotions that you could tap into by seeing and witnessing art was as much a healing process as the medicine that they might have used at that time. Over the next few centuries, many people used bibliotherapy in different ways, and many authors self-prescribed. For instance, George Eliot set herself on a road of conscious reading of books sourced by her and her a young friend when she lost her life partner, and this enabled her to get through those difficult years of mourning, and eventually she married the man that she was reading with. So bibliotherapy can take you into exciting new routes. Also, since George Eliot, there have been other moments of bibliotherapy consciously being used. For instance, after the Second World War, when veterans came back with shell shock, they were given Jane Austen to read. One might think that's a slightly strange kind of literature to give to soldiers, but the intention was to help them to feel reconnected with a gentle, comprehensible world, the world of England and rural gentility. And this was deemed to be a very helpful process. Then, in the 1990s, when self-help books were very prevalent, many bookshelves arrived in libraries with titles aimed at children, which were to help them with specific issues such as going to the dentist, losing a grandparent, going through bereavement, or having two mummies. But we were the first people to bring bibliotherapy back to its purest form, prescribing fiction purely to cure life's ailments. And we were the first to put it into a book, which was our first book, The Novel Cure, an A to Z of literary remedies, which addressed ailments from the emotional to the situational to the physical. And all of those ailments are tackled with a novel cure. We then did the same thing with our children's book, The Story Cure, which is an A to Z of books to keep kids happy, healthy, and wise. And that addresses all children's ailments, from fear of the dark to wetting the bed to being bullied to moving house to more adolescent ailments such as first love, first kiss. And our remedies range from ages from 0 to 18. So we've tackled a wide range of issues with a very wide range of books. And within each ailment, we have often 3 different cures for each ailment, depending on your age. So we might have a picture book for young kids, a chapter book age kids, and then a young adult book for the older kids. Is that the end of me? Oh, yes. So since we started doing bibliotherapy at the School of Life, quite a few other people have taken up the baton around the world. And one of those people is this lovely man, Cesar Pereira, who we met recently in Portugal, who is a self-styled bibliotherapist who cured himself of his stammer by using bibliotherapy. And he was so overwhelmed by the power of books to cure his very both physical and psychological ailment that he has taken his coaching through books into Lisbon and taken it to many people very successfully. In England, there's also the government-funded agency called the Reading Agency, who have a long list of mood-boosting books, which they make available to GPs, for GPs to prescribe to their patients who are going through minor non-physical ailments, you could say, such as depression. And I don't know, have you encountered these mood-boosting books in your GP practices?
They're mainly for mild depression.
Yes, but I've already met a couple of GPs in the audience who are prescribing literary remedies in different ways. So bibliotherapy is becoming far more widely known.
So as we were attempting to get, as we were researching the novel cure and attempting to turn ourselves into doctors overnight without the aid of going to medical school, some of us had it quite hard. And we were very much enjoying the whole theatre of this whole thing, as you see. Here we are, using old-fashioned stethoscopes. Where's Ravi? Some of us are still using stethoscopes. Excuse me. We realised that we had to get ourselves familiar with the ailments. Thank you, Ella, you sort me out. The ailments that we were professing to cure. and also the drugs that we were going to be used, i.e. the books on our shelves. And we realized early on that a lot of ailments that we were dealing with had both physical, here we are again, Ella with her vintage ambulance, that we actually sometimes pitch up at music festivals in this. And once we did get a little girl with a cut knee who turned up, hopefully looking for, for a proper doctor, and we felt quite guilty at that point, but we did our best, and then we got talking about books, and she went away extremely happy. So we realized that the many ailments have a physical as well as a psychological element to them. And we very much enjoyed playing with that sort of two-prong approach, as Ella said, sometimes using more than one book. So an example would be obesity, which we came at in two ways. One with this book, I don't know whether anybody knows this book, Muriel Sparks, A Far Cry from Kensington. It features a young widow. She's in her 20s, she works in publishing, and she realizes one day that she's become rather large. She hadn't kind of seen it happening. And she makes the decision to eat only half of everything, whatever it is. So half the sandwich, half the banana, half the cup of coffee. And by so doing, she reduces herself by half by the end of the book. And then this book, which was a kind of one of those things where certainly, this is a Portuguese author, Antonio Tabucchi. Certainly Tabucchi did not set out to write a book about the possible psychological causes of overeating. But if you read between the lines in this book, it's kind of there. This is a book set in 1938 in Lisbon. It's about a guy who's the editor of the cultural pages in the Lisboa Evening News. He's doing this job in the shadow of fascist Spain. There's censorship. He's not allowed to publish what he wants to publish. So he's become very frustrated and he feels very powerless. And he goes to the local cafe for lunch every day and tucks into a really greasy omelette and drinks lots of port and smokes cigars. And you can tell he's kind of comforting himself in this way. And then one day, he meets these young people who are involved in the political underground movement in Lisbon, and he gets caught up in their work. And the next day when he goes to the cafe, he orders a seafood salad and mineral water. So this is, it's a lovely novel which gets you thinking about the other ways of seeing it. You'll have noticed, of course, that we have mentioned being able to cure physical ailments quite a lot. And audacious as we are, we do know that we have certain limits. We don't have a slide for this one, but we tend to take a psychological approach with those physical ailments. So, for instance, appendicitis, our cure is a children's book, actually, by Ludwig Bemelmans called Madeline. Does anybody here know that book or read it to their child? So it features a child who has their appendix out in hospital, somebody there, and she's miserable. And then all the other little girls from her orphanage come and visit her, and they see that she's getting lots and lots of presents, she's getting lots and lots of attention, and then they all want to have appendicitis. So, for the child in that situation, it can really help to turn the situation around and see it in a different light.
So Suze has talked about the way that many of our the books that we recommend cure by using the story and the psychological element, but some of our cures work more by the rhythm of the prose rather than the story itself. So just as with music, there are some kinds of music that make you want to get up and dance, and others that make you want to lie down and gently go to sleep. With novels, there are some whose very rhythm of their prose makes you want to get up because they're so full of energy. So, for instance, if someone that we know, one of our clients, can't get up in the morning and is afflicted with lethargy and apathy and a general inability to get going, then we would give them Don Quixote, which is the kind of book whose quality of prose makes you want to jump on a donkey, grab a sword, and go out in search of adventure. I'm sure many of you who've read it have done exactly that. Conversely, if our client is the kind of person who's incredibly wired and actually can't sit down and is really jumpy, and one of those people who obviously drinks too much coffee, naming no names.
Look at me, look at yourself.
That's me. Then we would recommend them this book Fernando Pessoa's Book of Disquiet, which is a book which has a very meandering quality of prose. It's very dreamy, it's quite circuitous. Some would say that actually nothing happens in the book at all. And it is the kind of book that can actually send you to sleep. And that's why we have it in the novel Cure as a cure for insomnia.
So reading is obviously a very subjective experience. I actually find this quite an exciting book. Ella does get sent to sleep by it. So obviously every reader is different and your relationship with the book is different for everyone. So that is something that makes what we do complicated. That said, there are some studies emerging which are able, seemingly, to measure the effects of reading on not just empathy levels, but on our behavior, and not just immediately after reading, but in some time after reading a book. There's one study in particular which we're fascinated by, which happened in Ohio in 2012, which was measuring how beliefs and attitude could be changed by a story. And particularly how the more transported you were by the story. We come back to that word transported again. So when you've forgotten who you are for the duration of reading and actually kind of living in somebody else's shoes for a while, you know, smelling what they smell, seeing what they see, and hearing what they hear, and feeling the emotions that they feel. So you're having a virtual, sensual experience. Were more likely to have their behavior change than those who weren't transported by the story. So they gave a story to people in the run-up to some local elections in Ohio, the state primary elections in 2008. Those who read a version of the story which transported them, they identified strongly with the character, they became transported, they forgot everything else, just that story. Of those people, 65% went on to vote themselves a week later, as opposed to the group who said they weren't transported by the story, they didn't really care for it, they didn't get involved with the main character. Only 25% of them went on to vote in the election. And what I should have told you is this story is about somebody who had to overcome a series of obstacles in order to vote. So that's kind of interesting. So this is called, apparently, the scientists doing this study called it experience taking. Which seems to us to suggest that not only do you get to feel the emotions of the point of view character whilst you're in that state of being transported by a story, but you also get to benefit from the wisdom that they learnt from their experience, you know, the emotional runoff, something of the effect of having that vicarious experience with the point of view character is left with you. And that, I think, is particularly exciting to Ella and I.
So maybe it doesn't matter what literature we read, but simply that we do read and that what we read transports us. And this is possibly where everyone needs a bibliotherapist to help them find that book that will transport them. Reading demands a sustained focus over a period of time. And during this period of the 21st century, when everyone is distracted by screens constantly, when we live in a very distracted, some would say atomized world, having that moment to sit down and read a book is something incredibly valuable and unique. Studies have shown that compared to other forms of relaxation, reading is 100% more effective than drinking a cup of tea, 300% more effective than going for a walk, and 700% more effective than playing video games. So
do them all together at the same time.
Exactly. We'd urge you to go for a walk, drink a cup of tea, and listen to an audiobook. And then you'll be so relaxed that you'll never feel stressed again. Apparently, as little as 6 minutes of reading reduces your stress levels by 60%. It slows your heartbeat, relaxes your muscle tension, and generally makes you feel much better. So maybe it really is true to say that a novel a day keeps the doctor away.
And if if not totally, we perhaps wouldn't want the doctor to be completely kept away. It's very intense. It's one-to-one. You get to take in this effect at your own pace, exactly when you want to. There aren't generally bad side effects, although, of course, if we're saying it can cure, as Professor Dumbledore says, it could also inflict injury, but that's another talk. Yeah, that's what we would like to offer up today. Thank you very much. Okay.